Bezrat Hashem. So I was living in New York with a fellow rabbinic rabbi in training for my rabbinical school, and we were both interviewing for jobs as a rabbi. And I remember one night I walked by his room, and he was on the phone with Shul, and I heard him saying, "In the billions, in the billions." I thought to myself, this guy's a pretty good negotiator. So I asked him later, what's going on with the billions? Oh, he didn't say it like that. He said, in the billions. I was like, so I asked him, what's going on with it? He said, well, they asked me, how do you count how do you count today from the creation of the world? In the thousands or in the billions? That's what they asked him in his interview for the shul. So he said in the billions. But really, this question is asked not only in rabbinic settings, but also thinking Jews have this question. The Torah, according to Jewish tradition, the world was created 6,000 years ago, 5,779. And according to modern science, a little bit more, like 4.5 billion years ago. So how do you reconcile those two accounts? And so there are different approaches within Jewish tradition as to how to deal with this. So I'll just present you like a real quick overview of that, and I'll just share with you where I go with it. So one approach is, you always get the extremes. One approach basically says, we have tradition, we have our tradition, this is what we have. We go by that. The world really was created for 5,000 some years ago. If science says a lot of things. They change their minds on different things, or they get new material, they adapt their theory to that new material, and it keeps changing. We know we've had this tradition for a long time, we go by that. There's an approach like that. The Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, famously said something like that, but he had a more in-depth explanation. But he said that we go by the account of 5,779. It says in their Chumash, in the Chabad Chumash, it says that next to the creation story, actually. So that's one approach. Other two approaches which maintain the 6,000 account and deny science or explain it in a certain way are as follows. You might find them more or less convincing. It basically all goes back to kind of when they started finding fossils in the Earth's crust, that seemed to be dated from much earlier before. Rabbis had to deal with that. So one approach said that he brought a midrash, which says that to explain the fossils, and that they were there from a long time ago. He said, there's a midrash that says God created before creation, God created worlds, and God destroyed worlds. It says like that in the midrash. So how do you understand that? It's not clear. But he wanted to argue that those fossils are remnants of those worlds that God created a long time ago and then destroyed. And so people who critique that say, well, it's not so clear. If God destroyed them, are we guaranteed that there was remnants from those worlds? And maybe it was even just talking about spiritual worlds. So those are people deal with that. Another approach, which is, I think I'm going to get some eyebrows here raised. This approach says that, I'm just going to present it, that God planted these fossils in the earth in order to test our simple faith in the tradition of the 6,000 account. Okay, so the critique of that's obvious. Like, why would God do that? Does God play games? The opposite. God's one to use our intellect to analyze the world and to come to conclusions based on that. So it's a difficult one. Now, here are two approaches which try to reconcile both, to try to maintain both of them. So one approach says that the Psalms 90 verse 4 says that a day in your life, God, is like 1,000 in ours. And so if you stretch that past 1,000, maybe 1,000,000 or billion, you can say something like this. When God created the world, it says a day, but they mean a specific 24-hour day. Those days could be very long days. In God's eyes, days are really long. And so 1,000 years, 1,000,000 years. And so based on that, maybe you can account for the larger account. Only problem with this is that in the same passage, we talk about Shabbat as the seventh day. And we observe Shabbat as the seventh 24-hour period. And so in that same account, you have all kinds of different days. You have a day that's 1,000,000,000 years. You have a day that's 24 hours. It doesn't work out so well, that explanation either. Another approach says that, which I kind of like this one the most, so there are critiques to this too, but I heard Rabbi Riskin once say this. Anybody, you know Rabbi Riskin? So he's been here. So he said this. I tried to find the video, but I couldn't find it. I saw it a long time ago, but it appears in different books. There's critiques of this too, but he says basically the first 3 days of creation, the sun and the moon weren't created yet. So you could, more logically, I think, than the previous approach, say during those days, maybe the days really did stretch out longer because we couldn't go by the setting, the sunrise, and the sunset of the day of the sun. So based on that, you could still maybe maintain that 6,000 years, but those first days before the sun and the moon were even created, you don't even know how to account for those. That's another approach. A more direct approach dealing with this basically can do away with the 6,000 account. This would be a Maimonides approach. Maimonides says that whenever science contradicts the Torah, and by you adopting scientific, he says this in his Guide to Perplexity, by you adopting the scientific view, if that doesn't contradict a basic tenet of Jewish faith, you can go by science. So saying the world was 6,000 years, 4 billion years, it doesn't affect a tenet of basic Jewish faith. So based on that, Maimonides could just say, okay, the tradition says 6,000, but that was their science of those days. But we really go by today's scientific account, 4.5 billion years. And one last approach, which Rav Kook and other people present, they basically say that the Torah is not a science book. It's not a science textbook. It's a book which teaches us how to live our lives. And there's different accounts for different reasons. So we can accept science as the scientific account and still say the world was created in 6 days. Why? For different reasons. Maybe the Midrash offers that says we were created at the end of everything to teach us humility. That we were created after the fly, the lowly fly, to say that even they came before you. Humble yourself. Or another one would be everything was created in 6 days, even though scientifically maybe that wasn't accurate. The account is there to teach us that the whole world was created for us, and we were placed here to take care of it. So that's a different way to go, and basically you can accept the scientific approach and still maintain at least the message of the Torah. So I don't get so. There's other things I struggle with. I struggle with this a little bit because it was just trying to figure out how to work them together. But for the most part, I kind of oscillate between Maimonides' approach, which is just, if science says a certain thing, it doesn't contradict Torah. You can just go by science and you find ways to reinterpret the Torah. And also seeing the Torah more as an ethical guide, less as a scientific textbook. Those two approaches, plus the other one, which is basically the first 3 days, there was no sun and moon. All those together kind of cause me to not to struggle with this so much.